Giving up details. Do you sell boo boo? Ooh. Okay. Okay. Let's start with this one today. Videos. I think we'll start with Austin Nathan today. Crikey! Hello, Ninja Watchers. I'm getting prepared, getting ready to go. I'll be talking about missing 411. To get back to work, you can't. Get back to work. You can't. Just get back to work. You can't. Jeff H. Pigs. Hey, what's up, bud? I'm gonna be talking about missing 411. Have you ever heard of that before? Jeff H. Pigs. You ever heard of missing 411? But it's not a cameraman's fault, not sly undercovers. Too obvious for oh boy. They're totally have you ever heard of missing 411 there, Jeff? Hey, Jeff. Next I'll play I Want to Marry Jeff Hates Pigs. In fact, I'll play that right now. Or My Name is Jeff. That meme man Jeff. How about that? Here goes that meme man Jeff. You've never heard of missing 411. That's interesting. Well, I'm going to be talking about it today. It is probably the most fascinating quote paranormal. It's not really known what's causing it, but there can't be a prosaic explanation for it. It's too weird. You'll understand what I mean. And it's an interesting, as far as a phenomenon go, and as far as supernatural phenomenon go, because there's evidence for it, and there isn't really a theory. Rather than proposing a theory and then trying to look for evidence to back it up, missing 411, it's all about the evidence, and then looking for correlations in the evidence, repeating patterns, etc., like an FBI profiler does, and that's exactly what's happened. So I'm going to be going over the profile points for missing 411, and you'll probably understand some of the profile points at least, and also the historic basis, how it came to be studied, how it came to be known about and researched. And I think you'll agree, probably if somebody out there is looking for a supernatural topic to sink their teeth into, where there's a lot of scientific evidence and not a lot of theorizing or claiming to have certain knowledge that other people can't easily access, like saying I'm a psychic and I talk to the aliens or whatever, which I'm not saying that there's no one like that who's legit. I don't know. Some of them certainly seem legit. But what I am saying is, if you're looking for a paranormal topic, this is a good one. Now, it's done by an ex-cop police officer, and I don't like the guy that much. I don't like his politics. I mean, he's a likable guy in general. But I don't like his politics. I don't like the way that he goes about things and the way that he'll say things like, "Oh, I'd let him know that I'm an ex-police officer and I couldn't get any courtesy," and blah blah blah. Things like that kind of bother me. His politics really bother me. But that said, the man who does it, his name is David Paulides. He is nonetheless legitimate. I can't point to his work and say that there's any flaw in it just because I don't like his politics. And it's probably the most fascinating paranormal subject that exists, just because, again, it's all about what evidence there is and not speculating about what's going on or claiming to have special knowledge about what's going on that other people don't have. And that's Missing 411. And what Missing 411 is, I should say really quickly, is people who go missing under very strange circumstances. It started out only in national parks and forests, and it did end up moving to the city eventually. But I'll explain that later. But it started out just with weird, strange disappearances in rural areas and forests, and missing parks is where it really started out. National parks is where it really started out. And I'm about to get ready to get walking here, and I will begin to speak about the subject. Mr. Osgood, hey buddy, good to see you again. Mr. Osgood and I had a very interesting, fairly long chat about a number of different subjects. That he's a good guy, definitely appears to be a good guy, and of course, unlike so many of us in the world, in this country today, he's being completely screwed over by his government. It makes no sense why they have to do this shit, really. But I'm gonna play I Want to Marry Jeff Hates Pigs here. But yeah, man, so many of us, Mr. Bones. Yeah, there are wackos out there all over the place. Okay, I'm one of them, but I'm at least not a wacko that's messing with other people all the time. Let's see here. I just want to marry Jeff Hates Pigs. I just want to marry Jeff Hates Pigs. Hey, hey. WassamattaU loves Gloria and BS Unleashed and Jennifer Hill and Sally from the Down Under Valley. But I just want to marry Jeff Hates Pigs. Hey, hey. All cops are bastards. Is that all cops are bad or all cops are bastards? Which one is it? I'm not sure which that is, but it's true either way. Okay, here we go. That's all I really want is true. I guess it's called Parody Girls Just Want to Have Fun, but I actually wrote this song and I intended it to be called I Just Want to Marry Jeff Hates Pigs. So whatever. Chevy makes his own decisions on the titles. It stands for both? Okay. I wake up and log on. I can't sing, I know. I'll stop. I'll quit it. Okay, all right. Miss Hates Pigs. That's too funny. It's just for you. I can't sing and I have bad rhythm. I'm sitting here with like a complete seizure is happening to me or something. Okay, let's get to working. The love and and Gloria, and these unleashed and Ginny Lee and Sacramento Lily and Sally from the Down Under Valley and Jody too. But oh, I just wanna marry Jeff Hates Pigs. I just wanna marry Jeff Hates Pigs. Hey, no pig suey, be gone. No pig suey, be gone. No can pick suey. Alright, we're walking. We're talking about. Hey there, Big Chief. Big Chief. I'm gonna turn down the music here. Who's got your attention? Okay, we're walking. Brandon F. Mitchell, Red Bull Princess. All of y'all who's just come in, I'm going to be talking about missing 411 today. We're getting going right now. I'm going to turn the camera around as I walk. My friend Kinetic Customs is sending me a chest mounted thing to hold my phone with, so my live streams will be okay. Every Big Chief, who's Big Chief? Do I know you by a different name there? I'm gonna mod you, Big Chief. You seem to know everybody. If you fooled me, you fooled me. And that's so that you can go around and everybody can go around and hook up with each other. I've already said this a million times. Everyone get to Big Chief's channel, subscribe to him. Big Chief, you get to everyone's channel and subscribe to them. I'm talking about missing 411 today, which is, if you haven't, has anybody out there heard of missing 411? Anyone of you at all? I was surprised when I first asked to see that. I know Osgood knows about it. We talked about it a little bit. Jeff Hates Pigs does not know about it. Who does? Does Brandon Mitchell know about missing 411? Does Big Chief know about missing 411? So missing 411 is almost certainly a paranormal phenomenon because it's so weird. The data points that go with it, the profile points. And what it is it's a set of crimes, namely kidnappings of some kind. Obviously, people who were obviously taken somewhere by something or someone. But what exactly took them cannot be figured out. And it started out, so it's for certain a paranormal phenomenon, and you'll see why. However, there's no, at least until very, very recently, and I'm not going to get into today about anything about what this recent development is where he's possibly pointed to a possible culprit. But for the first 10 years of missing 411 or whatever, he just refused. The author who does the research and who was initially told about the phenomenon, did the first books about it and dug up all this information. He is an ex-police officer, an ex-pig, and he's piggish in his political views, and he talks about arresting meth heads and being undercover and stuff. I don't like that stuff. I don't like that part of him. But that doesn't mean I can discount the legitimacy of his work, which is extremely legitimate, well done work. Now there's now 8 or 9 missing 411 books. The first two were Eastern United States and then Western United States and Canada. And that's where these cases were that he originally located. Now, I go back in time and talk about how missing 411 started. So missing 411 started because this ex-police officer... Oh, okay, so Brandon Mitchell knows about it. I don't see anybody else talking about knowing it. If you gotta go, I'll see you later there, Red Bull Princess, or maybe you're saying bye to somebody else. Anyways, so yes, it's disappearances, as Brandon Mitchell has stated here. It started out where this ex-police officer was in a park, a national park, doing some work for some books that he had done. And I'm just going to tell you right off the bat, they were Bigfoot books that he wrote, the Sasquatch books. And he didn't care about Sasquatch. He didn't know anything about Sasquatch. Didn't know anything about paranormal anything at all. It's just he retired from being a police officer, and he went to work for a tech industry as a human resources guy. And it turned out that the two tech heads, the two heads of these two big companies that he worked for, one of them, had both had these experiences as children that were very similar, where they believed that they had encountered Sasquatch. And they came to David and they said, look, we'll pay you full salary, more and more. We'll give you all the expenses that you need. What we want you to do is go out there and investigate this like a police officer and come back and give us an answer. Do these things exist or do they not exist? And he didn't, at first he refused. After a while, he eventually got talked into it, at which point he went to the Hooper Reservation and he ended up writing Tribal Bigfoot and another Sasquatch book, both of which are very well done. He took a police chief with him an ex-police chief who was also a forensic artist. And every witness that they interviewed, they had sign an affidavit about their experience, that their claims about their experiences were true, under penalty of financial and even criminal, whatever. I'm not sure how an affidavit works. I believe it would probably be just financial liability in this case, but whatever. They signed a thing saying, basically, I'm committing perjury. Criminal, yeah, it'd be criminal, I think. Anyways, I'm committing perjury if I am lying about this. And then they also used the forensic artist to do a artist rendition of what they saw based on their descriptions. And as they got done with doing however many tens or hundreds of these, they were looking at these pictures that had come out, and they were looking at the reports, and they ended up kind of figuring out, hey, these are humans. But that's another subject for a different day. But one quick thing is, the Harvey Pratt, the artist who did the drawings, he can take like a surveillance footage with a guy that has a full beard on, even a big fake beard. He can take that beard right off and draw the person's face. No problem, every time accurately. I mean, unless it was just like obviously some huge ridiculous thing, but the types of disguises that most criminals wear, or the type of difference that's made between somebody shaving and not shaving, he can actually draw their face. So he drew Patty's face from the Patterson-Gimlin film with no hair on it, and what it looks like is not an ape. She looks like a Native American woman, a manly Native American woman. Granted, but nonetheless a Native American, very Native American, and or possibly Chinese. There were a lot of Chinese gold prospectors and railroad workers in that area of the world at that time, and they had a lot of stories about Sasquatch taking their female Chinese wives and whatnot and daughters as reproductive slaves, essentially. So Patty could have, and the local tribes around the area, they also, have these stories. So Patty could have a lot of human in her, that maybe more than some other ones do, although generally speaking, they do tend to have that type of face. Anyways, this author then was in a national park, considering following up with more books about this subject, when he was noticed that he was being followed by some of the rangers there. Now, this isn't abnormal for him. They don't like, the National Park Services and the federal government does not like people talking intelligently about Sasquatch. If you're out there acting like a nut, they'll encourage you all day, but they don't like people talking intelligently about it. Hey there, XXGeo. I hope everyone has heard my new XXGeo song. It's quite a banger, if I do say so myself. Geo, you've been modded. Everybody make sure and get over to Geo's channel and subscribe to him. He does great work. But also make sure and get over and watch my new XXGeo song, and you might find yourself shouted out in it. There's a lot of shout outs in it. You just never know. And so, there's Brent Shimko. And so this author was walking around the national parks thinking about doing another Sasquatch book when he was noticed he was being followed. I'm going into the store. Please bear with me for 2 seconds.
Let's get that.
Just a box of 99 cents. Okay, I'm almost done here. Having to get my very unwise to be using canister sticks here. I know it makes me look very dumb. I don't care. So he was in this national park and he was doing some research, and he noticed he was being followed by the some of the park workers. And that's not abnormal because, again, like I said, that the government doesn't like people talking intelligently about. So he goes back to his hotel room that night, and these same park rangers who were following him around, he finds that they're knocking on his front door of his hotel room. And he's saying, you know, what the hey are they doing following me back here? That's a new one. So he answers the door, and they say, hey, you know, we've worked in a couple parks and we know who you are. And he's like, look, I can't help you, man. And he's about to shut the door, and they're like, no, but we think we can help you. And he's like, okay. So he's intrigued. So he listens to what they have to say, and what they have to say is in sync with what he knows about park workers, and that is that they tend to move around park to park. They'll work like 7 years in one park and 7 years in another park, etc., and be moved around a lot. And these guys had worked at multiple parks in their careers, and they had noticed some very disturbing things about cases of missing people. And they wanted him to they gave him some hints, some cases as hints to get going, and told him, you know, look into this. We know you're an author. We know you do good solid work, research work. We'd like you to please look into this. We think someone really needs to. And they remained anonymous, of course, because the Park Service would retaliate against them, take their pensions, fire them. They've proven this in multiple ways since this whole odyssey started. So they leave. He calls some of his pig buddies and says, hey, I just got this tip. Will you please look into disappearances in national parks and just see if there's anything weird going on here? And here's a couple cases they threw my way just to get me started, and just take a quick look, see if there's anything to this. There's probably not, but go ahead and get back to me. Well, they called back within a couple hours, and they were like, holy smack, Dave. Dave is his name, just like my toxic deadbeat father. Holy smack, Dave. There's really something to this. Something really big that no one's ever, you know, touched on or talked about that we can tell so far. And what that was is that these people, and this is what these rangers described to Dave too, he said, when somebody goes missing in the national park, when certain circumstances happen as someone is going missing, it seems like those are triggers that tell the park this person's not going to be found, and or this person's going to be found deceased only, or they're going to be found in XYZ area after 2 weeks, etc. And he said what you'll see is that on the front end, when these people go missing, there's a big hoopla. They get a whole bunch of resources on it, usually, in most cases. But then after the first few days, it's like everything just dies down, and you're almost not allowed to talk about this missing person anymore, even when they've gone missing in places where there's nowhere to go. Like, it might be, a lot of these areas are areas where in order to get out of them, you would have to have climbing gear. Circumstances like that, and the people don't. And yet they vanish. Another thing about it is, usually these people are with other people, and they go out of sight of those people for just milliseconds sometimes. Over a rise in the trail, or around a bend in the trail, 10, 15, 20 feet ahead of the person behind them. They go out of sight. The next person comes along, goes around that corner, go over that bend, over that rise in the trail, and the person's just gone. And you know, a lot of these cases, there's clear cuts, nowhere to go, or whatever. Just shale rock, nowhere to go. And so when these people first go missing, especially the kids, that's another thing. The kids that go missing, they go impossible distances. There's a handbook for missing children or missing people, and it talks about things like a person 2 years and younger is going to be found within a half mile of the point they disappeared from 97% of the time or whatever. Well, these kids apparently, like sometimes in the night and whatnot, go 9 miles, 10 miles, 12 miles uphill often before they're found, whether that be alive or deceased. They've gone impossible distances in impossibly short periods of times, and the authorities wanted to say, well, you know, strong 2-year-old or whatever. But if you have a 2-year-old, you know, they don't want to get away from mommy and daddy. A lot of these cases, they're right there with the parents. The parents are like, he was right here. I spun around while I was laughing at a joke. I spun around and he was gone. Things like that. Or we stopped paying attention for 30 seconds and he was gone. Or he went walking from here to that trailer that's 12 feet away from us. And we turned around and he was gone. Didn't make it to the front door and he was gone. Things like that. And of course, parents are going to want to say things like that when they lose their kids. But you can tell in most of these cases, they're telling the truth. There's multiple witnesses, etc., etc. And there's all kinds of weird elements to it. And these seem to be indicators to the Parks Department that, hey, you know, at some point, you might as well stop throwing resources at this disappearance because this person's not going to be found alive, blah, 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 which that's pretty ruthless and cold. And then basically after that, the person's never talked about again. Now, one of the first things that, once they figured out that there was something going on, one of the first things they did, this cop and his friends, hey, Let's OTVO, you're shouted out in my newest song about the XXGOX song. You and Brick both are shouted out in that song. So make sure and get over there and see that. Good to see you, buddy. And so, yeah, the first thing they did was they FOIA requested the information from the parks about disappearances in all the parks. They started out with Yosemite because that seems to be the worst park of all for these disappearances, where the most crazy disappearances happen. It's just like in the world, the capital of the world for strange disappearances. And so he FOIA'd these parks and they came back and said, oh no, we don't have lists of missing people in our parks. And being from law enforcement, he's sitting there thinking, him and his buddies are sitting there thinking, that's impossible. You know, the number one thing, you're going to want to keep a list of people who've gone missing in your park and when they went missing, etc., etc. So that way that when you find some bones or somebody finds some bones down the line, you don't have to do a whole ton of back work trying to figure out who this person might be. You have a good idea right off the bat to start a starting point. And there's just a whole lot of other reasons, just so you can spot trends. Look for serial killers in the park, things like that. Or animals, problem animals. Trends that might not be so obvious right away, but if you have this data, it could leap out at you. And so they figured that they must have worded these FOIA requests incorrectly. So they redo all of them with the lawyer's help, and they send it back in, and the parks come back and say, no, we understood you the first time. What we're telling you is there are no lists of missing people from any of the national parks, let alone all of them together, which were both, you know, bits of information they requested. And so him being a published author, in the FOIA law, there is an exemption that says if the government doesn't have a piece of information that you need as a published author and you want that information, you can get an exemption from any fees associated with putting that information together. So he files for the information to be put together based on his status as a published author. He's got multiple books that published that have sold, you know, hundreds of thousands of copies each, whatever. And they come back to him and they say, no, we're not going to honor this exemption and give you the because your book, because we looked at FOIA. That's a bogus exemption. They clearly did not want to release this information, and they obviously have it. Because the Parks Department has the largest law enforcement contingent. Most people don't know this. They have the largest law enforcement contingent in the nation. And these rangers, they're better trained than most city cops, big city cops, or medium-sized city cops, at the very least. If not, they go their training that they go to is more like detective level training, and most of them end up serving in that capacity and whatnot. They're not out just to pick up garbage. They might sometimes, I don't know, but generally speaking, that's not their job and that's not what they're doing. They're looking for felonies in the park. They're pigs looking to create criminals where there are none. just like street pigs. So they know the importance of keeping data. And there's just no doubt that they have this information, but they just don't want to release it. And so they came back and they said, we're not going to honor that exemption because your books aren't in enough libraries. And if you want the lists, we will put them together for you. However, what it's going to cost you is $34,000 for Yosemite. And if you want all the parks, all the national parks comprehensively, a list of missing people, then it's going to be 1.4 million for you. And so he was he was just laughing like, what is going on here? Now, since that time, 12, 15, whatever years or more has gone by, and Yosemite now has a list of missing people park on their webpage. This author has covered in his book these cases. They went to little libraries in towns, which is a huge place surrounded by many, many different cities and towns. And they went through old microfiche. I mean, they really did. This guy's work ethic cannot be called into question. I'm sure he was a hard-working pig. I don't like the guy. He blocked me a long time ago. I still watch his videos. I'm not easily butthurt. But he blocked me just for talking about saying true things about police officers. But his work is impeccable. It can't be questioned. I'm not going to sit here and slam his work because I don't like the guy. That would be unfair and wrong and incorrect. His work is really well done. And so they came back and denied the author's exemption. And so again, they just went around. All they could do was go around and look at old newspaper articles. You know, this was at the kind of the beginnings of the net blooming, so there wasn't much information that they could find, at least not for the first couple books that he wrote. That was online. They had to go and dig all this stuff up, and what they ended up finding out was, after a fairly not that long of a period of time, they started to notice that there were profile points that were coming out on certain cases, on cases that fit. And so they started to put together, like an FBI profiler, they started to put together a list of profile points. So the number one is people tend to disappear with canines, or when they go missing, buffering, damn it. When they go missing, canines cannot find a scent. Even though in many of these cases, their last whereabouts were known. And they've got items of the person's clothing to give to the dogs. It's not normal for the dogs to be able to if it hasn't rained and nothing blah blah blah, and even when it rains, usually dogs have a fairly decent success rate when they're put on, tracking dogs. I mean, when they're put on a spot where the person last was and they're given a correct scent, they're pretty good. But in these cases, never. The dogs can never find a scent, or if they do appear to find a scent, oftentimes later on the person is found and it's in the opposite direction the dogs were leading. Or the dog will pick up a scent and it'll follow that scent up a certain trails or whatever, and they think they're gonna find the person. All of a sudden it'll come to a fork in the trail, maybe where there's a tree and the trail forks in two different directions, and it'll sit down in front of that tree as if the scent stops right there, and it can't find where the scent continued on from that point. Things like that. That's one of the profile points. The other profile point is there's a point of separation where the people are together. They lose visual sight of each other for just seconds sometimes, and that's when the person goes missing. Another profile point is if the person is found, they are often found after weeks of searching. They'll be found or days of searching, they'll be found right there in the middle of the search zone, or right where they disappeared in the first place. Their body will suddenly appear, and in a lot of these cases, it's clear that they haven't been expired for all that long, but yet they may have been supposedly out in the wilderness for 2 weeks, in blizzards in some cases, or just in below sub-temp freezings at night, whatever the case. or just out in the wilderness for all that time, and yet they appear right in the middle of the search area. Yes, you did say thank you, Gio. I appreciate that. And another profile point is usually when the people are eventually found, if they're found deceased, their cause of death cannot be determined, or it'll be or some very generic hypothermia or exposure type of cause will be listed. Something that just doesn't have those terms don't really have a whole lot of meaning. Another profile point is when they're found, they'll be found without their shoes usually, and without a lot of their clothing. Sometimes completely without all their clothing, often with missing articles of clothing that are things that are never found, boots, things that never expire, but yet they're never found. Boots don't go in the wild; they don't disappear and go bad and vanish. And so you wonder where these people's clothing went in a lot of these cases, and they want to blame a lot of it on what they call paradoxical undressing, which supposedly means that when you get hypothermia, and law enforcement in North America likes to point to this what's the word I just used? Anyways, paradoxical undressing. And what it means is that when you get hypothermia, there comes a point right before you finally pass away that you feel warm all of a sudden again. So much so that any clothing that you do have on, you begin to strip off. And that's why people who have hypothermia are supposedly found without their clothing in the North American wilderness. Now, what's very interesting about that is there's no scientific evidence to back that theory whatsoever. And not only that, but on top of that, see you later, Gio. On top of that, oh, did you just leave the beautiful Kentucky hills? Boy, that's a strange, eerie place. All right, Gio, I'll see you later. So on top of that, on there being no scientific backing for such a theory being real, he also went to Sherpas in the Himalayas and people in other countries with mountainous and cold areas and whatnot, and places where they have, deaths from hypothermia. And he asked them into place after place, do you see this paradoxical undressing happening here? Where these people that pass away from hypothermia that freeze to unalived on the mountain here or whatever, where they end up taking their clothes off at the end and you find them with missing clothing articles. And not only that, this missing clothing is also nowhere to be found, so it's clearly gone, come off somewhere nowhere near where they're found. But whatever the case, they all said the same thing. They said, no, we don't see that here. They laughed. They paradoxical undressing? No, they didn't buy it for 1 second. Nowhere that he checked, and he checked multiple places. So that seems to be a part of the phenomenon that happens, and it's so prevalent that law enforcement has come to believe in this paradoxical undressing, which probably does not exist, because logically speaking, how could there be none of the people who freeze on in the Himalayas there, at Mount Everest or whatever, how come none of them do this paradoxical undressing? None, ever. It's never been documented. It just doesn't make sense that in North America people would do that, and in other places they wouldn't. Even some places where they weren't all extremely harsh places or anything either. They were places that with similar weather to ours and similar weather to where these people had been found, and the people were found. And the places they said, no, we don't know anything about this paradoxical undressing nonsense. Now, I mentioned before that one of the profile points being that canines can't find the people. Another one is people disappear with their canines, along with their canines. And a lot of times the dogs are discovered partway through the search. Sometimes they're never found. But a lot of times the dogs are found, but they can never manage to. A lot of times searchers will try to use the dogs to locate the missing people, and that's never worked out for them. So the profile point list goes on and on and with these very strange, nowadays it's very unusual for coroners to not be able to determine the cause of death in a case. And yet, time after time, these coroners either can't or they're giving some very BS sounding explanation for cause of death. That's just not normal with today's modern science. And, or they're giving hypothermia for a cause of death when the temperatures weren't low enough, and maybe it was summer in an area where the person disappeared for 48 hours and they passed away, and they can't determine the cause of death. Now, one of the interesting things about all this profile points that they put together, which the list goes on, there's about 15 of them, maybe more, I don't know, but they eventually, people kept telling this author, hey, eventually you're going to take this into cities. And his answer was always the same. No, I'm not going to do that, because in an urban environment, it's too easy for people to look at a case of a missing person and say, hey, that person just fell afoul of the wrong people and they took him and made him disappear or whatever, blah, 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 blah. It's too easy to write off cases that way in urban environments. So, he refused to go to the cities. Well, at some point, about the fifth books, or after about 5 books or so, he went and took his profile points that he had developed from the first 4 or 5, 6 books, whatever, and he plugged them into the cities, and he got in urban areas, and he got very interesting results. And those results were that he got hits on the profile, that things that matched perfectly, but they only happened in a few places. One of them is Manchester, England, where they call it Little Venice, because they have these shallow water canals that, much like Venice, and they've been finding people unalived in those canals now for quite a while, lots and lots of people. And it's a similar thing. They can't determine the cause of death, blah, blah, blah. Nobody ever sees what happens to these people. They just end up oftentimes in like knee-deep water, either drown, or they can't determine the cause of death or whatever, in knee-deep water, or whatever. And not only that, but the people, there weren't any high-risk people that were that were hit by this search of the profile points of missing cases in urban areas. There wasn't one homeless person. There wasn't one drug addict. There wasn't one prostitute. There wasn't one anything like that. Every single person whose case came up, who hit the profile points and their case came up on a search, every one of them was literally a cream of the crop university student, or just graduated from graduate school, or professional athlete, or college athlete getting ready to go into the pros, or, I mean, just the cream of the crop, top of the top people. And and they were all males, and they were all right in that age range of just graduating college age range. And they all appeared in Manchester, England, or in areas right surrounding the Great Lakes, or there was like 3 cases in California, including one of the only 2 females whose case hit the profile points. And that is the disappearance of, oh man, it just flew right out of my head just as I thought of it. She disappeared in that famous hotel down in California where that serial unaliver Richard Ramirez lived. She was an Asian woman that was younger female that was traveling around, and she disappeared in that hotel down there. What was her name? Anyway, she fit the profile points. So did like one male from California, or 2 males maybe, and then there was one female, I think, in the Great Lakes area. All the rest of the people whose cases hit the profile points, they were all young, prime age, cream of the crop men. In Manchester, it's the same story. All these people they're finding unalived in these shallow little canals. They wanted to blame it on what they call a serial unaliver that they called the pusher, which there's no evidence for. No one's ever seen any one of these people. And any of these people, if they got pushed into these canals, they would just stand up. And even if the canals were somehow deeper, they would swim, because these are top athletes and healthy young men. And it doesn't make sense, this pusher theory. Now, one thing that's come up from those cases is that in a number of those cases, there was also a couple of cases from ski resort areas in like Switzerland that also fit the profile points as well. Very weird ones. Like one guy that was on vacation with his family for Christmas. They would go to, oh man, it was a really famous European ski place. Anyways, he was walking a family friend home from a bar one night. It's a little small town basically, and people go to the bar at night or whatever, and they ski all day. Anyways, there's no way in or out of this town except for by train, which only runs in the daytime twice. And yet somehow this guy just walking this woman a certain number of feet to her hotel room. She went into her room. She was a family friend, and then he went on, and his hotel was only like 20 feet away from there or whatever, and he manages to just vanish. They don't find him for days and days on end, and when they do, he had gotten overnight somehow out of the of the city there. So they weren't looking for him. When he first went missing, they thought, well, he couldn't have left this area because there hasn't been any trains in or out, and they were never looking for him outside the area. But they searched everywhere in there and they couldn't find him. And when they finally found him, he was well outside of the area. I probably shouldn't have brought that case up because I've kind of brain farted a little bit on what it's about, but there's another detective who put together a lot of these cases in the New York and Great Lakes area in the New York area around the Great Lakes, and he wanted to blame a serial unaliver as well, and he called it the smiley face killer because he had found these smiley faces. Good evening, Ryan Labs. He had found these smiley faces painted in some of the places where their bodies had been found or where they disappeared, but it was a stretch of a theory, and it probably, looking at it in hindsight, this guy did good work, and he was great. It was good of him to put these. He was the only cop out there in the world to put together these cases and say something very wrong is going on here, and our cream of the crop men are being taken, and they're being found in no one's ever, of all these disappearances, no one's ever seen what actually happens to the people. Now there have been some people who've come back alive. But I'm just going to continue with what I was saying. That officer, he was good. He put together the fact that these disappearances were happening in this area. No one else had. It's just that the cause that he ended up pointing to was probably not correct. But he wasn't looking at the issue from 50,000 feet. He didn't have the knowledge that these cases that he was looking at had profile points that perfectly matched rural and forest disappearances, national park disappearances, and national forest disappearances, and rural area. He had no idea of any of that. So, he did what he did his best. Jeff Gannon is his name. He did his best, and he did help because he helped to, this author to find a lot of the cases. Now this author found a lot more cases that mix and match in with it that were just outside of Jeff Gannon's jurisdiction, and et cetera, and he also found that the cases in Manchester were related. The Manchester one is crazy because there's like 250 of these people. But it's strange too, because you would think that plugging these profile points in, that you would have some spots in the United States and Canada and other places where a match would come up. There just was none. There was just only these few places, mostly college cities around the Great Lakes and New York, places like New York, and a couple in California, and a couple in these like ski resorts, and then a whole bunch of them in Manchester, and a whole bunch of them around the Great Lakes as well. So one of the guys that disappeared around the Great Lakes is a very interesting story, and I'm going to start talking about some of these stories, and then I'm just going to do a couple of them, and I'm going to end the stream for tonight, and I'll talk more about it tomorrow. But one of the guys who disappeared, he actually was found alive, and he's one of a very few people who was found alive. He was found alive, like, I believe it was 9 months or something after he went missing. So he went out cross-country skiing one day on Lake Erie, and he had done this many times. No one was worried about him, blah blah blah, but he did not come back in that night. So the next day they go out looking for him immediately. There hasn't been any storms or anything like that, and they find his backpack and his skis propped up against a tree on the shore of Lake Erie, And then his footsteps go out onto the frozen lake in the snow. Hey, Everett Sanchez. And they just come to an end. There's no tracks going back. There's no indication that, obviously you couldn't land a helicopter out there anyways, but there was no snow blowing around as if a helicopter had come and picked him up, or anything like that. I mean, there's just nothing, just his tracks just ended. And so no one knew what really happened to him. They ended up determining and saying the only thing they could try to say was that he had hit a soft spot in the ice on the lake and fallen through it and was gone and drowned, obviously, and that had then refrozen over and covered with pristine snow, even though there hadn't been any snow, and it wasn't warm enough for there to be soft spots on the ice. So no one really knew what happened to him, but that's just all that they could come up with. They didn't know how else to explain it. So something like 9 months later, this guy wakes up. He's on a hill somewhere, a couple hundred miles from where he went missing. He's wearing clothing that he doesn't recognize, and he's got a small bag of tools, of some kind of almost like gardening tools, I think they said. I can't remember exactly, but and also of paper maps with markings all over them, strange paper maps. And he didn't know where he'd been. He ended up where he appeared on that hill. He was like 7 miles from his aunt's house, and he knew where his aunt's house was, so he went there. And then he ends up going home to his parents' house and knocking on the front door before they're even informed. Here his dad opens the door, believing that his son is dead for the last 9 months, and here his son is. And the son, that guy, he actually had been 1 semester or something away from getting his doctorate in psychology, or he was very close to it. And he actually went back to university and graduated, and he is a psychologist out there today. He will not talk about what happened. Now, initially, when they found him, they made him answer questions about where he'd been, or they coerced him into it, or whatever. And he swore up and down that he did not know and had no memory of what had happened to him or where he'd been. It's very strange. That's very unusual for anyone to come back alive. There are a few other cases now. There are actually a number of other cases where people are found alive, but they're always children who are too young to talk, or people with disabilities that make it so that they can't talk. Or if they can talk and they are gone for a period of time and they come back, they tell very, very strange stories, some of which I will get into tomorrow. Most often, though, they just can't remember what happened to them. And sometimes things will happen like a brother and sister went missing in the woods, and after several days of searching and not finding them, the brother just shows up back at his house like nothing's going on, and he didn't remember that his sister was lost out in the wilderness. And just weird stuff. They told some very weird stories once she was found alive, I will mention. And the stories that she told are incredibly frightening and weird. Now I'm going to talk about one case of another person who survived, and this was a kid. And he was barely old enough to talk. He was 3 years old, and he went missing in the Mount Shasta region, a Mount Shasta area at a campground. And his family had gone to this campground for generations, basically. And he was there with his parents, and his mother said, they were like 50, 75 feet away from the river that flowed through the area. They weren't close to it. She said that she said he was right there. He was right behind me. She said they were laughing. She spun in a circle, slapping her thighs or whatever, laughing, spins around, he's gone. It was that kind of a description. And of course the authorities are thinking, well, she just doesn't want to admit she was negligent or whatever, blah, blah, blah. But they're looking and they're thinking the kid is in the water, so they go and get permission to dam up this river, and they do, and empty it, and they're looking for him, and they can't find him. And this is all in the course of one night. Well, the next day, the searchers are getting ready to head out to go and look for this kid again. And they go around a bend in the trail, and they actually see him in the bushes, just right outside the camp that they're camped in that night. You know, a stone's throw away. And they get him out and they say he was hiding, I think, from them. And this happens a lot when they find kids alive. But he didn't really say, they didn't bug him about what happened. They were just happy to get him back. He goes home with his parents. They don't really ask him. They just know he was out all night. He seems like he's in good condition though, good shape, whatever. They let him go home with his parents. So about a few days after he goes home, his grandmother comes to visit. And his grandmother is there, and he says to her, Grandma Cappy, or whatever her name is, I really love you, but I don't like the other Grandma Cappy. And she's like, what do you mean, dear? Well, he proceeds to tell the story of what happened to him. He vanished, at least in his own estimation of what happened. And it's a very strange story. So what he ends up saying, and the dad comes out and he's like, yeah, he's been saying this about this other Grandma Cappy. I didn't want to press him about what happened because we're worried he's traumatized and blah, blah, blah. Well, he comes out and spills the whole beans. He's only 3 years old now, so, you know, he's not just talking like an adult, but he's basically tells a fairly coherent but strange story. He says that he was with his mom, just like she said. He was right behind her. And he fell into a hole in the ground, he said. At which point he was on the trail that they were on, but his parents were no longer there. Like, he felt like he fell through a hole, and all of a sudden he was standing where he was before, but his parents were gone. So he's calling around, like, wondering where his mom is gone or disappeared to or whatever. He said things were a little off, too. Like, they didn't really get a great description of what he meant by that, but you can kind of imagine almost like all of a sudden things are almost like colors are off and whatnot. So what he ends up seeing is, to his relief, is his grandmother standing up on a hill a little ways away waving at him. So he goes running to her saying, Grandma Kappa or whatever, Mom and Dad disappeared, blah, blah, blah. She's like, it's okay, honey, I'm here to get you. Come to me. So he goes with her, and it is his grandmother. He goes with her, and they walk up to a boulder, and she waves her hand or something like that, and the face of the boulder disappears, and there's a cave there. He said it was nasty, full of spider webs and dirty, but they walked into this cave a little ways, and then they came into a room that was much cleaner. And I guess before they walked into that room, actually on the ground there was a pile of old shoes and purses and clothing, human clothing, tons, like a big old pile of it, looking like some of the clothing, he didn't really, you know, he was too young to really make note of how old the clothing was, but some of the stuff he described, it sounded like it might have been hundreds of years old even. But whatever the case, there's this pile of clothing there. They walk into this room. Now, then this woman is in there, and she's asking him, she sits him down behind a little table like thing. He says that all around in this cave, there were what looked to be like racks and racks of medical instruments or possibly guns. He wasn't sure what he was looking at. He said everything was covered in a thick layer of dust under there. And so she sits him behind this table, and she starts to ask him a whole bunch of questions and doing tests on him, taking little hair samples and doing this and that. And finally, she lays a piece of sticky paper on the ground, and she says, okay, now I need you to poop on this paper. And he says, well, I don't have to poop. And this was the first time that this grandmother-like being got kind of uppity with him. Now, before this, he had figured out that this wasn't his grandmother, because every time she would pass by this particular light, he would see wires through her skin. And sometimes when she wasn't by the light, she would see like sparks going through those wires and stuff like that underneath her skin. So he had figured out that this wasn't really his grandmother. And he says, I don't have to go poo. And she says, no, I need you to poop on this paper now. And he says, well, I'm sorry, I don't have to go poo. And at that point, she becomes uppity for the first time, and she kind of comes around the table at him and goes to grab him by the arms and tell him, you need to poop on this paper, and he passes out. Now, when he wakes up in that bush on the side of the trail where the searchers found him. Now, the story is weird so far, right? But it gets a lot weirder, so stay tuned, and then I'm going to end this stream. So once the kid tells this story, the reason the story gets so much stranger is the grandmother, like I said before, they would go to the spot for generations of their family. So the grandmother had been camping at that same spot just 2 weeks previous to when this incident with the kid disappearing overnight happened. She had been up there with a male friend of hers. They were not involved. Her husband she was a widower. The other guy was a widower. She was a widow. They were not, but they were not involved. They were just friends. They slept in separate, whatever. But they were camping up there in that spot. And that night, they noticed these glowing eyes watching their campsite. And they kept on trying to use a spotlight to see what this animal was that was moving around all their camp looking at them. And it kind of gave them the creeps a little bit. But they could never, no matter how many times they tried to surprise it and put the light on it, they could never see anything. So finally, they figure it's just a curious deer or raccoon or something, and they go to bed. She goes to bed in the back of a truck, in the bed of the truck where her sleeping bag is, and he goes to bed in a tent. They're set, like I said, they're not together, they're separate. She wakes up the next day on the ground, face down, outside of the truck. She gets up, she feels like absolute crap. She doesn't know what's going on. She looks over, and her male friend is outside of his tent laying face down in the gravel 10 or 12 feet away from her. And he's out cold. And she wakes him up, and the two of them, they can't figure out what the hell's going on. They ended up deciding, they found little round holes at the base of their necks, little bloody round holes at the base of their necks. And they ended up deciding that they must have been bitten by some kind of poisonous spider and had some kind of a bad trip, basically, and that they just didn't remember anything. And that's what they didn't even tell anybody about it because they just didn't know what to think. They just woke up feeling like crap outside of their tent. They got this one little bloody mark on their neck. They don't know what happened. They just kind of write it off and go home, and they don't tell anybody. And then 2 weeks later, her grandson disappears, and here's this clone grandmother. I mean, not to get too weird on you, but it certainly sounds like Granny had like a DNA test of her taken, and a duplicate of her was created, or something like that. I mean, that's just what it sounded like from what what the grandmother said as soon as this kid came out and told this story about what happened to him. So these are just a couple of the stories of the people who are found alive, which they're fairly rare. I'm going to end this stream now for today. I pretty much lost everyone anyways. But if you're still here, put a 1 in the chat for me. And I'll know everybody that's still here. Everyone go and check out I'll be back tomorrow to talk about more about Missing 411. And I'm going to put together some notes tonight too, just so I can be a little more organized about my thoughts on it and make sure and touch on everything. And I'll be talking more about Missing 411. And I encourage all of you to go and look up Missing 411. It's been in the mainstream media before. You can see George Knapp talking about it in like a 15-year-old segment on a Las Vegas local news station, things like that. But it's been on Coast to Coast quite a bit, and I would encourage anybody to listen to the Coast to Coast interviews with David Paulides, especially earlier ones, but later ones as well. You can also watch his movies most of the time on YouTube. He's got 3 movies, 3 documentaries. I would suggest watching them in order. The first one's about small children disappearing and the weird strangeness around it. The second one's about hunters and people that are highly experienced in the woods who vanish. And the third one is called the UFO Connection. That one that he thinks that UFOs are behind all this. And in fact, up until the UFO Connection came out, he had usually denied that was what he was thinking was happening, and I believe him. I think he kind of had a change of heart at some point, or I don't know. He hasn't actually said that this is what's happened. All he's doing is presenting information that he's now found of this UFO connection. So he doesn't do a lot of thesis creation, and he doesn't do a lot of looking at what the causes are. He does a lot of dismissing causes. Like, he will tell you right up, it's not Bigfoot taking people. It's not this. It's not Dogman. It's not that. And he'll tell you exactly why it can't be that. But, I mean, for one thing, they're not coming into the city and taking these guys, most likely. These cream of the crop athletes and scholars and whatnot. But anyways, so I would go and check that out if I was you. The 3 documentaries that he has. Any coast-to-coast interviews if you're interested in the subject anymore, although I will be explaining a lot more of it tomorrow. Everyone go and see my new XXGOX video and song. I believe it's pretty darn good. Lucy Warren, hey, you get modded. I'm just finishing up the stream here, Lucy. And so make sure and go around and connect with everyone here on their channels, and everybody go to Lucy Warren's channel and connect with her. And I'm just saying goodbye right now and explaining that I'll be back tomorrow to talk more about missing 411 and where you can go and look for information about the subject yourself. And also explaining that I have a new XXGOX song out that everyone should check out. It's pretty dope. And I shout out a lot of people on that song. Unfortunately, the version of the song where I had a much longer list, I wasn't able to use. It just got a little bit, I jacked with it too much and it got too jacked up. And anyways, I ended up having to use this version that I used, which I'm happy with the version, but it doesn't have as long of a shout out list, but it does include a lot of people out there, including some of the people who visited this stream here right now. So go and check that out. And I'm going to sign off for now. I'll be back tomorrow. I thank everybody. I see that Jeff Hates Pigs is still here, as is Jeff. My name is Jeff. And all right, yeah, good to see you all, and I will see you all tomorrow. Peace.